We're going to be talking today with Reverend Jack Shrier and Pastor Larry Broughton. Reverend Shrier has pastored for many, many years, pastored in the city of Waterloo for 17 years, and has always had a great concern for street kids, the young people that are in serious problems on the streets of our cities and towns. Reverend Shrier, it's good to have you here.
Thanks, Tom.
And Pastor Larry, good to have you here as our co-host tonight. Jack, you produce a paper called Youth Beat, and dealing particularly with the problems of drugs. And I noticed your latest edition here is about crack, the deadly drug menace. Let's get into this a little bit and tell us a little bit about your ministry.
Well, actually, what sparked the publication of this particular edition of cocaine, as they can see, maybe I could just show that up to the camera and get a shot. This came out of the New York Post, that particular graphic that we're using on the front of this paper. And I was in New York City, and during my time there, David Wilkerson was preaching in the streets of Lower East Manhattan when I was particularly gripped with this problem. And on the right of where he was speaking from the platform, there was a heroin shooting gallery. And just up the street, we got a real taste of the violence of the street a little later on, just through kids beating, and come to find out how serious this whole cocaine and crack issue is. And, you know, when people think about New York City or Brooklyn, and then you come back to Canada and they say, well, that's New York City or that's Brooklyn. But the issue is drugs, and crack happens to be the menace that's been let loose in America in a fierce way.
What is crack?
Well, I think I identified here, one of the experts identified it. They said it's cocaine intensified, and its effects are cocaine's, but amplified, sharper, meaner, uglier. And it's in a vial, a small capsule type thing, and it's directly smoked, and it's I don't know enough about it to really be an expert on the actual use of it. I studied it, I looked at it like others did in Time magazine. I understand the crack house, how the crack house operated, and that type of thing. But the bottom line is that we are not really alarmed enough, I don't think, or aware enough that drugs are a serious problem in New York, but in Canada as well. Like just today, at the time of this taping at least, when we're doing this program, I heard of a heroin bust in Toronto that represented $3 million worth of heroin on the street.
You know what I don't understand is why young people get on drugs as they do. There's some root cause here. What's happening to our youth?
You know, I'd like to get onto that maybe a little stronger later on, but I would like to, I'm using a paper because maybe there's people that will write in and get some of this research we've done.
We'll offer the address, by the way, at the end of the show today, where they can write, and we'll be happy to send them a copy of this free of charge.
And I would like to make a few comments that I've done by research. And one statement that was made about drugs is that Bias and Rogers, these two athletes, said are the first wave of the drug culture generation. And Professor Harry Edwards of the University of California said that. So if I understand what the professor's saying, and if I understand what I see in society, we are about 2 decades into a very heavy-duty escapist kick kind of cult. And the problem is it's so prevalent that people are not conscious enough of what it can really do. And in the course of my research, there's a few things that I discovered about cocaine, and particularly in relation to Len Bias. And I think that a lot of young people, parents may not know who Len Bias is, but he was a Celtic to be. He had signed a contract with the Boston Celtics. And I know that the people in the Celtic organization were literally shaken and shocked by this whole thing. And the general manager of the Celtics said that drug people aren't stupid. They know if they can addict a superstar, they can link themselves to his name and to his fame, and then they can get other people to fall in line with the drug a little easier. So what happens with Len Bias is happening with every kid that goes into this thing. And that is, his high school coach told him. He said, Bias said, I don't use drugs. And there are young people out there saying that right now. I don't use drugs. Drugs, they're in every high school. Every kid knows where to get them. I doubt if there's a young person in high school in mid-central Ontario that doesn't know where to get drugs if he wants them. But his coach told him, he said, what you've got to be concerned about, Len, is guilt by association. And that's a serious issue.
Okay, define that for us. Now, what does that do? What kind of pressure does that put on the young people, this guilt by association?
Well, what he was saying to him is that you are what your friends are. And
it's peer pressure you're talking about.
Yes, to a degree, but I think it's even more serious than that, because let's say that Len Bias or any other person doesn't feel any pressure, peer pressure per se, but he has a good friend, somebody he really likes and appreciates and respects, and he's a drug pusher or a drug user, as was in the case of Bias. So Bias may have felt no pressure at all to conform, but he was associating himself with people who were conforming and who were using it, and hanging out with them even though he didn't want to use it. And you know, what the problem is here is that you never know when that trap's when it's going to be tripped.
So what you're saying is, John, if I understand you, he, by associating with these people, and at first probably thinking, I won't get involved in this drug scene.
That's right.
But somehow or other the pressure came on.
That's right. But he put himself in a position where he could be tripped.
Now, are you saying to young people that they should stay away from certain kinds of friends then?
You're telling me. Let me take another quote or two from my paper that I particularly like to share. And one of them is from the Proverbs of Solomon. He said, he that walks with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed. And that word destroyed, I put that in black letters and quotations, and I said it's a mild term when we're talking about the death of two outstanding athletes. You know, that's a mild term, destroyed. You're thinking about a whole life, not just destroyed career or a destroyed mind, but a life that's lost, you know, a death of a good, wholesome, potentially upright young man that had influence going for him. But
so now the kids, particularly the kids that are in church today, we're really saying to them, guard your friends.
Well, I think that's true, and I think that it needs to be on a high school campus too. Let me tell you a story here. I was in, as I said, in Upper and Lower East Manhattan in New York City, where Brother Wilkerson was speaking, David Wilkerson, and I chose, as I often do, to move from the group that was nearer to the stage, the platform that had been set up in the street, and I moved away from that surrounding where everybody was, and I stood over on another street. I like to get outside the circle where everybody's identifying with the message and just find out what's going on with people that aren't identifying too much. They're just sort of on a fringe. Here's a young girl. She could be your daughter or mine. Pretty, sweet, innocent. She's 12 years old. And I'm just talking to her, standing there talking, saying very little at first, but when she found out that I was interested in what goes on here, she just like somebody clicked a button, you know, and she really began to talk. She said, drugs are not for me. Kids my age are getting pregnant, and all the high schools, kids, my friends, and he said, I don't want any part of that. I've read a book on drugs. I remember the title, something to do with Alice, and she explained the whole plot. She said the police officers were in the schools warning them about drugs, and here is a really wholesome 12-year-old, and at the same period of time that I was on that corner in that area, I saw two young guys drinking out of brown bags, and later when they put one down, I went to see it was a Colt 45 beer in a brown bag, and they had finished their bottles, and I was over another area just a block away, and here's a couple of girls sharing marijuana and getting giddy. But here, in the midst of all this, is this little flower. The story is so critical is because she represents the average young lady or young guy in Hamilton or Toronto or wherever. But she made up her mind. She told me this straight out. She says, I've made up my mind that I'm not hanging out with druggers. I'm not hanging out with girls that want to get pregnant. I'm not following. See, she made up her mind about associations. And I thought the impact of that on my thinking was very forceful. I came back and I wrote a lot of the things that were concerning me about the abuse. But here's a young girl that really set an example of what I think this whole abuse problem should point up.
Yes.
I don't think that we can just focus on the abuse problem. We've got to say this abuse problem should point up something.
Yeah.
That you can't just run, you know, hither and yon with everybody and anybody. And Len Bias, I think, made a big mistake, and I don't know who he hung out with, but I know one thing, that he forgot. Jesus Christ said, I am the door. And if any man, you know, find me or come to me, shall go in and out and find pasture or find his soul satisfied. And Len Bias claimed to be a born-again Christian. He was a good church kid. And the mistake he made, a lot of kids are making, he neglected his spiritual life. And this is what I would like to probably focus on, is that Christ and cocaine cannot coexist.
Now,
do you think that, before we leave this association bit, that even the kids going down to their corner milk store start to get into the wrong crowd, and little bit by little bit, they leave their spiritual background in favor of the kids and trying to sort of get into their peer group, not meaning to get into drugs, not meaning to get anything else, but they do eventually go that direction?
Well, it's subtle, and I think all we can do is continue as best possible way we can find to warn them against this seductive, satanic style of getting us into wrong company, and usually we don't break down by going up to the local pusher and finding ourselves some drugs.
John, what, if I can interrupt you again, what part do parents have to play in this? I'm thinking there may be young people watching that have problems with drugs. There may be parents out here that are really broken. Their home is tore apart by this drug problem. Is there any hope? Can we offer these people any hope?
Well, I'd like to think that, again, because there's such a parable influence in Len Bias' story, because he was a very conscientious sort of guy, and church was important to him. And I think that had he stuck by Christ and the teachings of the Lord, and had he followed through on his spiritual commitments that he made in his younger days, I think that not only would he have been preserved, but he may have been now influencing many parents to turn their problems over to the Lord and trust the Lord for an answer. I was on with Jesse Barfield recently on Huntley Street, and Jesse was appealing to parents and young people to turn their lives over to the Lord. They had lived common law and all these other things, and whoever it is, it doesn't really matter. I think that personally, we've got to find some strength within, and that I don't know any other way to find that except to seek it from without, to find Christ and to seek God. And Len Bias went to church, his family went to church, and I would say get back to church and show an example to your children.
You have worked with David Wilkerson on the streets of New York, as you mentioned, and have had some association with his work, and there may be audience folks that don't know who he is. He has worked with these street kids for years now, and I understand has seen some dramatic conversions of young people. I'm thinking of Nicky Cruz way back in the beginning, really a hopeless drug addict.
Well, thank God there's a lot of young people that do still turn their lives over to the Lord. And I've been involved in Brooklyn many, many times, preaching, speaking to young people. And I remember one particular young, skinny kid, 17 years of age, came in with his parents, and I had no idea what his case was, and found out that he had a heroin habit of somewhere around $100 a day. And I was there watching him coming off cold turkey. I didn't stay through it all. But I was thinking about the prayer power that those addicts, all those men that were around his bed holding him up, were heroin addicts, and they had been cleansed by the power of God and delivered from drugs and found the power of the Holy Spirit in their lives. And this young man came to the chapel before I left, so you got to know the miraculous aspect of prayer and the power of God to bring a young kid with such a tremendous habit within a matter of a couple of days off that bed and out into the chapel and beginning to function normally, because that's a miracle. So I again, probably just, you know, add to what's been said, that I think we should be careful not to neglect spiritual things.
Yes. All right, let's go back here for a minute. If there's young people watching us today, and we sure hope there are, and we hope there are parents watching who may have some problems with, not that we hope that you have problems, we hope that you're watching this program. You may have teenagers that are involved in this whole drug world. What can you do? What we're really saying is here that there is hope in God through the Lord Jesus Christ, and there are many, many testimonies of young people that have been miraculously delivered. Brother John and Brother Larry, we only have a minute or two left here. I don't know if you have anything you want to say directly to parents or youth, but feel free to look right at the camera and talk to them, because I'll try to give you the signal.
I would like
just
to
look at this camera right over here, if you would, Brother Larry, and say what you have to say.
I would like to just say that young people don't have to get into the drug culture in order to get saved and be Christians. We would like to think that instead of having to go out into the world and see how bad you can live, your priority should be to see how close to Christ you can get.
Yeah.
A conversion is just as important for a young person who doesn't get into drugs as it is for those who are. But to those who are in drugs, we want to let them know there is hope.
Prevention is better than cure.
Yes.
Yes, somebody has recently brought up the point that we need to start emphasizing the rewards for staying drug-free. And as a minister, I certainly, almost every Sunday night, I have a special emphasis for youth. That's my goal. Tell them what it's like to be drug-free, the rewards of not touching drugs.
Yeah.
And I do that all the time in my meetings with young people.
If we can leave a final word of counsel here, just going right from your paper here, John, the guilt by association, you're really saying kids need to purpose in their heart to choose their friends and to guard their friendships.
Right.
The next point you've got here is that Len Bias failed to see that cocaine was an enemy.
Yes.
And somehow, if we can help young people to grasp the danger, the enemy of this thing, that it literally captures their life and virtually destroys them. And then, of course, your third point in the paper here is the fact that Len Bias neglected his spiritual life.